Hello and welcome to our April Permaculture Education Institute Masterclass. It's an absolute delight to have your company here for this very special session. My name is Morag Gamble. I'm the founder and director of the Permaculture Education Institute and host for this masterclass. My special guest today is the wonderful James Campbell, calling in from his tiny home in his emerging permaculture food forest in Essex. He is an extraordinarily talented comedian, author of many children's books, and a fabulous educator. His most recent book, which I can proudly say includes a little feature on me, is called Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet, published by Bloomsbury Children's Press. This is a wonderful book exploring very positive and practical ways to address the polycrisis we face today. It's like a permaculture course disguised as a hilarious children's book. I think every child, library, parent, grandparent, carer should have this book. James has pretty much always been a writer and has shared his comedy shows across the world on some of the biggest stages and presented sessions to thousands of schools. We're in for a treat today. We'll be exploring what his wonderful new book is all about and how James became such an incredible climate change and permaculture educator. So every month here at the Permaculture Education Institute, we host a permaculture masterclass, and I'm so glad that you're here today as part of this one. They're always free, but we love it if you're able to donate when you join because we send 100% to locally led permaculture education programs in refugee and village communities across East Africa, mostly led by women and youth. And make sure also to keep an eye out for our emails in your inbox for more masterclasses and for our monthly Permaculture Film Club. And also, we're hosting the first ever online International Permaculture Festival of Ideas in May, so look out for that too. And I wonder, did you know that you can sign up and start one of our permaculture courses anytime? You get lifetime access, it's online, it's flexible, and it's got a fabulous global learner community and access to feedback from me on your projects anytime. Our cornerstone program is the Permaculture Educators program, which includes both the Permaculture Design Certificate course and the Permaculture Teacher Certificate program. So check out the show notes for this and for all of our other courses, and feel free to get in touch. We can find a time to chat to see how the course might fit your particular permaculture learning goals. So all the links to James's books too and website are in the show notes. All right, let's go. All right. So let's get cracking. I am so excited today to welcome you all to this fabulous session. We have James Campbell here with us, joining us from the UK, from Thistledew Farm, which is a bit of a play on words, isn't it? I understand, James.
It is. I mean, it's not a particularly good play on words, but it is a play on words. So yes, when I first saw the field, as we often call it was 3 acres of abandoned farmland, covered in thistles and nettles and brambles and bits of broken machinery. And I've since learned, because I've been here for two and a half years now. There's a guy who lives around the corner who's about 75 and was born here, and he knows everything. We need one of these people everywhere. And he says that this field was an apple orchard. There was also apple orchards are hilarious. And also a blackcurrant farm. But then in the 1970s, the government decided that we didn't need apples anymore. What we needed was wheat, as much wheat as we could possibly have. And so they paid British farmers to chop down and basically grub out orchards to grow wheat. And it was more profitable to do that because there was a subsidy. So they took out all the trees and blackcurrants and then ploughed wheat, and then discovered that clay soil doesn't really work very well for ploughing, and then they realized it wasn't really profitable to actually grow wheat, so they just left it. And various people have sort of wandered through in the last 40-50 years, and somebody put cows on it once, and somebody put geese on it, and there's a square in the corner which is where I started, and that was a goose farm. You can tell because it's now full of nettles. So obviously there was lots of nitrogen in the soil, and then nettles jump in and go, hooray, we like this. And so I saw this field, and the thistles were higher than my head. But what I noticed was that it's basically like a south-facing diamond, which in the northern hemisphere is great, and in the north side of the diamonds we've got sort of horrible Leylandite giant trees and laurel bushes, which are ugly, but they're really good windbreaks. And I thought, what this is a sheltered 3 acre field. This is a sun trap. And I looked at the thistles and I thought, well, this'll do. Ha 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 ha. So yeah, that's why it's called Thistle Do Farm. And then over the last 2.5 years, I've been pulling out thistles, scything. I thought, I know my life has changed now when I own a scythe and know how to use it. So I scythed a lot of thistles and pulled out nettles and dug things out, and I'm slowly turning it into a sort of permaculture piece of paradise. Is what I'm trying to do.
Well, welcome to our session here today. We have people joining us from around the world. I'd love to invite all of you who are here to drop in where it is you're calling in from, so that we can have a bit of a look down in the chat. Open up your chat and feel free to drop in any questions or comments or chat all the way through, and we'll attempt as much as we can to respond to those, as well as anyone who wants to open up. Yes, who need glasses on, that's why I do this. And yeah, so I'm calling in from the beautiful unceded lands of the Gubbi Gubbi, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and really happy for you all to be here today, and really delighted, James, that you could join us. So those of you who obviously read the outline of what this session is about, James has recently published a book called Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet, that one there, through Bloomsbury Children's Press. James is also an author of many other books. The Funny Life of series. And I wonder if you've got any of those there, which is the Funny Life
of
of
soccer, I'm a professional.
Funny Life of Teachers.
Yes. We've got Funny Life of Pets, Teachers, Sharks. There's a football one somewhere, but I don't know where that is. Yes, yeah, I'm very lucky to have so many books out. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and
originally the latest book was going to be called The Funny Life of Saving the Planet. But I actually had to blackmail Bloomsbury into letting me write it.
I was going to ask about that, because it's kind of a bit of a sidestep from the Funny Life of Soccer or the Funny Life of Sharks. How did you get them to let you write this extraordinary book, which is essentially a permaculture book and an eco-literacy book wrapped up in children's humor and fully scientific, fact-checked book? I think it's absolutely brilliant. How did you do it?
Well, thank you for noticing. First of all, that's great. Yeah, don't tell anybody it's secretly a permaculture book. But so the first one of these books, the Funny Life books, was The Funny Life of Pets. So we did a show called Comedy for Kids, travel around the world, talking to children. And so obviously I picked up lots of pet stories because most kids have pets. So that was the obvious first choice. And the deal with these books is they're basically stand-up comedy in book form. You don't read them like a normal book. Normal books obviously start on page 1, and then you read page 2, and then you read page 3, and you keep on going until you get to the end. And then you say hooray and have a biscuit. But these books, you can just read a random page. That's the idea. And there are signposts and links that go from one page to another page, from one theme to another theme. So in the same way that when I'm on stage and I'm telling a story, I might go on diversions and digressions and tangents, and then I might come back to the central story, or I might completely forget the central story. That happens as well. So I thought years ago, wouldn't it be great if there was a book like that? Now, when I was a kid, I used to read the Choose Your Own Adventure books, which I thought were great, because with those, you chose, do you go down the wooden door or do you climb the tree, and then you turn to the right page and you follow your adventure. And I loved that. And also, I suppose, with non-fiction books, you can flick through. There are many books, aren't there, where you don't have to read them from beginning to end. But I thought, well, how about if it's like fiction, so it's stories, except it's true, and it follows that sort of tangential random format, and so they've done very nicely. I do always try and get in some sort of eco stuff, because I've also been obsessed with the climate crisis, and then in the last 5 years, permaculture. And so I try to sneak it in whenever I can. So The Funny Life of Sharks is a book about conservation because there are some funny things, but we kill 150 million sharks a year. They are apex predators. We need them to support the ecosystems that they live in. So it's very important. So I would sneak in bits like that. The Funny Life of Football was a very commercial book, and I didn't want to write it. But they paid me, so I did. That's the nature of writing a commercial book. But in that, there are pages about racism and equal pay for women. So I try and get in, good stuff. But with the football book, I remember I went in for a meeting. It was November 2019, and they said, "What do you want to write next?" And I said, because I have a list, and then they have a list, and then marketing has a list, and marketing usually win. And I said, "Can I write The Funny Life of Saving the Planet?" Because that's what I'm keen on. That's what I'm learning about. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm researching. So I think that would be important. And they said, "Well, we've already got one green book, and I think that's plenty. We thought, could you write The Funny Life of Football?" And I said, I don't know anything about football. And they said, "Well, we know. That's why it'll be funny." So I thought, okay. And of course, football's a great gateway subject into other things. So in theory, without wishing to profile people, your 10-year-old boy who doesn't care about anything apart from football will pick up a book on football, and then maybe will go, "Hey, books are quite interesting," and read some other stuff. It's possible. That's the theory. So I wrote it, and I wrote that in lockdown, which was really hard. Now my lockdown was not as hard as some people's. Obviously, I had to write a book. I also had to look after my own annoying children, which was difficult. But basically, so I could only write when they were asleep. So I wrote from 6 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock in the morning, and then the kids woke up, and the rest of the day was ruined. And but I did that
An
for
hour a
4 months.
day. Like, how did you do that? Like, that's phenomenal in of
Well,
its.
well, it took about a week for me to get into the habit. But eventually I did. And then I think my brain just understood this is what we do now. And so 4 months, and I wrote the book. And it did quite well. And so then when things got back to relative normal, they said, "Okay, what do you want to write next?" And I said, "Well, Funny Life of Saving the Planet," because I think they'd said, "If you write football, then you can do the planet next." And that was the deal. And then they said, "Well, we would really like you to write something different. We'd like you to write The Funny Life of Families." And so I said, "No." I said, "I'm going to write The Funny Life of Saving the Planet." By this point, I was living in a caravan. So I'd got rid of the house. I bought an old caravan, and then converted it to be off grid. I put a solar panel on the roof, wood burning stove, and I was living in a wild campsite in Suffolk in the east of England, and was trying to work out what to do next. Basically, I was looking for some land to do some stuff with. And I said, "So I'm going to write The Funny Life of Saving the Planet." So I said, "So that's what's happening. And if you want to publish that, that would be great. And if you don't, then I'll talk to somebody else," which was terrifying. But I thought to myself, well, by that point, I'd had 10 books published. I thought, well, if that's it, if this is the end of my publishing career, that's okay. That's fine. That's achievable. And obviously, the great thing about living off grid is suddenly all your bills disappear. And then so it leaves me in a position where I'm free to choose the work that I want to do, which is great. I sort of deliberately earn as little money as I possibly can, and any extra gets spent on trees, which is good. And I remember I spoke to a climate scientist. I can't remember his name. I apologize if he's here, but he organises Scientists Rebellion, and I was talking to him about something, and I said, "Can you give me some advice for going into this meeting?" I thought, if I go into this meeting with loads of facts, like, but the planet is doing this, and this is happening, and this is doing, that will help. And he said, "Well, you can use the phrase 'there's no publishing industry on a dying planet.'" That's quite good. And he said, "But essentially, don't go in there with an eco agenda. And this is a business meeting, and they exist to make money. So explain to them that this is a growing market, and it's always going to get bigger. We're going to need more books like this, and it'll make lots of money, and then they might go for it." So I did, which was very wise. And it took them a month. It took them a month to get back to me, and eventually they said, "Yeah, go on then, we'll do it." But they wanted to change the title to "Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet," which I like. I really like. It's quite punchy, and people seem to like it. And what I love about the book, if I may say so, is whereas the previous books they're all funny. Everything I write is funny, but they're not important. Like I said, with sharks, there are some important bits, but those bits aren't very funny. Shark finning is not funny. Football, but, things about racism, they're not funny, but they're important. But this book, I hope, is funny and important at the same time. And so I'm hoping that from now on, what I write, I'm trying to just write things that are funny and important.
Yeah, I really
But yeah,
noticed
that's how it happened.
There so many, the way that you write it. So you'll give someone a really important fact, and in the same sentence or paragraph, throw in something entirely funny. And I thought that is so clever. Like I think I said this last time we met, like I wish I was funny, because that makes things stick, doesn't it? Like if you have a good laugh about it, it's like it opens up something else in your brain, and it makes the ideas stick, and it becomes memorable and repeatable, and something that kids might actually joke around in the playground about, and not feel like it's just so deadly serious and boring and so earnest. And something about that way of doing it, and also just to go back to it and to point to that non-linearity of your writing, I absolutely loved. I'm flicking through the page, and then I'll get to this button. I was like, oh, that's right, I want to go and have a look at his ethical chocolate cake, and there's the page, and everything is just cross-referenced backwards and forwards, and it's so easy to use. And I can imagine, like, it brought out the kid in me, like this enthusiastic way of reading. And I just thought, gosh, every adult needs to read this book in terms of really absorbing some of the key information that we need to get a handle on, and then to read it with our kids, to give it to every child that we know, because it is just really brilliant. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to push it through and to make it get published. I'm hoping
Those are very kind words. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think with the humour, it does make things stick. There's somebody very cleverer than me, that says if you want to learn how to do something, then teach it to children, don't they? Somebody will drop that in the chat who that was. So learn it and then find a way to teach it. I think it was a mathematician. I can't remember. It'll be somebody will know. So yes, when you have to explain something to children, you really have to think about it. I mean, obviously, children are a lot cleverer than we give them credit for. But obviously, I tend to use relevant metaphors for them. I was particularly pleased with the water. I didn't realize how much unseen water we used.
Yeah,
But what I realized was, so for example, to make a new car uses 44,000 gallons of water. When everybody goes, oh my gosh, but nobody knows what that means. We don't know what's a gallon. How big is a gallon? Is it how many liters? Oh, it's 4.5 liters. What's a liter? I don't know. How many is that the size of my house? I don't know. And so I invented a unit of measurement called bath years. And the theory is that an average child has 3 and a bit baths a week, which is 5,000 gallons. 5,000 gallons? I'll have to check my own maths here. But so effectively, so say for example, a new car takes 8 bath years of water to make. So if you're 8 years old, that's all the baths you've ever had. That's how much water it takes to make all the stuff to make a new car. So yeah, that's what I try and do. But also, I think I realized a while ago, when I was doing my A levels, when I was 16, 17, 18 at school, and I studied King Lear, Shakespeare's King Lear. My favorite character in King Lear is the fool, and he's the jester. It's his job to say funny things, but say important things in a funny way, because that way nobody executes him. And I think that's what good stand-up comedy does. We talk about important things in a funny way, and so that way people can just sort of move on to the next thing if they want to, but they stick. These things stick, I think. So yeah, thanks for noticing all that. It's nice that you've read it.
How did you get into stand-up comedy?
By accident. So I've always been a writer. I decided I was a writer when I was 7, and just got on with it basically. And when I I started going around schools telling stories. So when I was 19, 20, I did some voluntary work in a primary school. I read them stories at the end of the day. Then I started making up my own stories. And then one day, one of the teachers called Mrs. Wall, she said, I've been talking to my husband about you. He's a head teacher at a school down the road. And he says, would you like to go to his school and tell them some stories? How much would you charge? And at the time, I was working in a bar for £3.50 an hour. So I thought £25 for an afternoon. That'd be about right. And I went there and I did that. I was sick in a lay-by on the way. I was so nervous. And then they liked it. I said, "Would you write me a testimonial?" This was towards the end of the summer holiday of the summer term. It was 1995, and then I hand wrote 100 letters because I didn't have a printer or a computer. I was just living in a bed sit, and I hand wrote 100 letters to my 100 closest primary schools. And then over the summer holidays, I bicycled around to save on stamps, and I hand posted 100 letters. Best mail shot I've ever had. I got like 20% hit rate. 20 schools phoned me up and said, "Yes, come to our school and tell stories." And then it sort of snowballed. And then I accidentally moved to Scotland, as you do. And I was living in Inverness and again going around schools telling stories. And then one day I got a phone call, and it was from a man. I can't remember his name, but he said, "We hear you tell funny stories for children." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you fancy doing funny stories for grown-ups?" And I said, I don't really like grown-ups. They're very confusing. But what do you mean? And he just started a comedy club. This was Inverness. Now, if you don't know the area, Inverness is now, I think it's now officially a city, but only because there's literally nothing else for 100 miles in any direction. So it's a very small city in the Highlands of Scotland. It's the capital of the Highlands, and this man started its first ever comedy club. I had never been to a comedy club before. I don't think I'd even seen it on the television. Now there's comedy everywhere. Comedians are like a plague. But I think there was a program called Late at Jongleurs or Live at Jongleurs, but I didn't have a television, so I'd never seen that. And so he said, "Come along and see what you think." And I went along, and there was Scottish comedians in a sweaty basement with about 100 people squashed in, and they were talking about rude things in rude ways. And I stood at the back and I thought, this is what I do. Because until that point, I didn't know how to describe myself because I was writing stories and then performing them, and they were funny. So I was a writer, but it wasn't published. So if I said to people, "Oh yeah, I'm a children's writer," they would say, "What are your books called?" And I would go, "I don't know. I was like 22. I only learned how to write recently." And then so they say, "Okay, so you're a storyteller." And I say, "Yeah, so I tell stories." Now in Scotland, in particular, there's a whole culture of traditional storytelling, which is great if you've got 4 hours. And that's mainly it's an old person in a kilt smelling of whiskey, and I was 22 and was wearing combat trousers and smelled of whiskey, and so I wasn't a storyteller, except I was. So for about a year, I thought, am I a contemporary storyteller? Maybe that, or am I a performance writer? I wasn't sure. And then I went to this comedy club, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I do. I just don't do the rude words." So I thought, I'm a comedian. Interesting. And so I started doing comedy in this club because they wanted local people to do, short spots because no comedians lived in Inverness. And so very soon I got hooked onto that. And for about 5 years, I travelled around mainly Scotland, but also London. And every night I'd be in a comedy club, and every day I'd be in a primary school, which you can only do in your 20s because there's not a lot of sleeping went on.
So you went to all those big festivals, like Edinburgh Fringe Festival and
Yeah, I did. And I did 2 shows. I did 2 shows. I did my children's show at lunchtime and my adult show in the evening.
Oh,
But over time, the children's show got more like the adult show. It got more like stand-up comedy. It became more interactive with the audience, and less structured and much more improvised. And very quickly, I would know my opening joke and I'd know my closing joke, but the 57 minutes in between, no idea. Because with children, you see, you can walk on stage and there's a boy in the front row dressed in a Spider-Man costume, which that doesn't happen in the Comedy Store unless there's swear. And so so if that happens, you have to do an entire show about Spider-Man. It would be rude not to. And then the stand-up comedy, which was, you know, I went through all the phases of being quite confrontational and a little bit offensive, and trying all the different styles of comedy and deadpan and all the rest of it. And but I found I was most comfortable with a story, with some sort of thread that I could go off on tangents and come back again. And so that started being more influenced by the school stuff. And so eventually, after about 5 years, it became the same thing. And there was a lovely year in Edinburgh. I think it was 2002. I'm not sure. It's all a bit blurry. And I had two reviews for both shows. So the children's show was called something like James Campbell's Not Made Out of Cheese. And the adult show was called, I think it was called James Campbell May Contain Traces of Nuts. And the same paper but different reviewers. The children's show got 5 stars and the adult show got 1 star. And basically, the children's review said it's amazing. He just makes it up as he goes along. It's completely improvised. You no idea where it's going to go. He doesn't know where it's going to go. It's amazing, right? And the adult review said he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just making it up as he's going along. It's a disaster, right? But the thing is, well, by that point, because I knew which shows they'd been to, it was the same show. It was exactly the same show. And so yeah, so that just showed me that that's how that worked. And of course, eventually, after a while, you know, the children's stuff really took off. And I sort of realized, well, children started coming to the adult shows, so the children's shows would sell out, and then children started coming in the evening. So then I had to clean up the adult show, obviously, and that all helped as well. And so eventually, it just became the same thing. And then one day, when I got management and producers and things, and they said, okay, so you're going to have to pick here. Do you want to be the only children's comedian in the world, or do you want to be one of 300 circuit comedians all trying to get onto a panel show? I went for the first option.
Mm-hmm. What do your kids think about
Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
was it a question, or did I just go?
So I don't know. That was good enough. That was perfect, actually. What do your kids think about your jokes? My son says and that's probably why I have a complex about it, because my son tells me I'm totally not funny. Do your kids think you're funny?
But so I've got two kids most of the time. So my daughter does, and is very similar to me. She's 8, and yeah, we just crack each other up all the time. And she reads all my books, and she's a big reader. My oldest son is 17, and is autistic, and he's also literally the funniest person I've ever met. But he only does it occasionally, and when he does, I just can't breathe for laughing. But he refuses to read anything I've written, on the basis that it's not Lego. But he does every time I have a new book out. He insists on having a copy, which I sign for him. And then what he does is he uses the book as a notebook. So he just writes in big black felt tip pen over the top of my book, usually lists of characters from Thomas the Tank Engine, or people from Fireman Sam, or the names of episodes of Mr. Bean, and completely overwrites my work. So yeah,
talk
so
about neurodivergency in the book. Like, is that inspired by obviously your personal experience?
Yes, yeah, I'm surrounded by neurodivergent people, and are they neurodivergent or neurodiverse? They're a new, yeah, but my other half picks me up on this all the time. It's wrong in the book, by the way. Nobody noticed. So yeah, a person can't be neurodiverse. You can't be diverse on your own, but you can be neurodivergent. But lots of people say that everybody's neurodivergent. There's a bell curve, and most people are in the middle, and then there are people who are the outliers. I have lots of characteristics of ADHD, but I don't have a diagnosis, and I don't want to try and speak for neurodivergent people in the neurodiverse community. But my other half is autistic, and everything I know about it, I know from her. And so the way she puts it is that the outliers, the people who think differently, obviously it's quite hard for them sometimes because they're living in a world that's been devised and invented by neurotypical people for neurotypical people. But the great thing about the neurodiverse is that in terms of society, is that they're a bit like canaries in the mine. So they tend to notice when things have gone a bit wrong beforehand. So, for example, she always says she's a head teacher, and so she uses the example of as a child who doesn't like wearing a tie, and they're autistic, then people go, oh well, he doesn't like wearing a tie, so maybe we should make an exception for him, and he doesn't have to wear a tie. Would that be a good thing to do? Which is a good thing to do. But the main thing is what this child is telling you is that ties are stupid. He's telling you that he feels really uncomfortable with a tie, which means that everybody else feels slightly uncomfortable with a tie. And so he's your early warning system there. If a room has got too noisy and the special needs kids kicked off because the echo's doing their head in, it's also an uncomfortable environment for everybody else. So listen to them, make the room quieter. And so if it's too bright and shiny, it's too bright and shiny for everybody. And then when you get into the adult world, my other half will not start a meeting, will not start any meeting unless she knows when it's going to finish, which is great because then everybody knows when the meeting is going to finish. So it's very important. And I think in terms of climate change and saving the planet, there are lots of neurodivergent people who, when they see something wrong, then they point it out. Now, my son, Joe, if I've changed any item of my clothing, he will tell me immediately. If there's a button gone, he just looks at me and he just points out things that's wrong. Okay. If there's a cupboard door not shut in the house properly, he's Dad, can you shut that? So he notices tiny things, right? And my other half notices things that I just don't see these things, right? Now maybe I'm at the other end of the extreme, I don't know. But so if you take Greta Thunberg as a classic example, she identifies as being neurodivergent. And she says when she realized there was something wrong with how grown-ups were running the world, she couldn't let it go. And that's my experience of living with neurodivergent people as well. If something's wrong, then they will not shut up about it until we've sorted it. Yes, jam has to be spread right to the edge of the toast. Otherwise, it's wrong. For example, and if governments are funding fossil fuels, it's wrong, and we don't let it go. So I think a lot of the polycrisis, new word I'm using at the moment, trying it out, polycrisis, has been caused by neurotypical people, mainly white men, of course, like me. And so we need people who think differently to solve the problems. We need people who look at situations and come at things from a different angle. So yeah, we need everybody. We need a whole polyculture ecology of people and ways of thinking to start unpicking the very complicated problems that we have. In my humble opinion.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think, what you were saying in the book too is really about how it does help us to see from a different lens, to like take off the blinkers and actually see different possibilities. And I think that's where we're going to actually start to be able to make difference and move ahead. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the research that you went into for your book, because you spoke to a lot of kids about what to include, like, just in the stories and the storytelling, like, and how did they shape what you wrote in the book? What were the things that you thought, right, I've just got to put this in here because this is...
No, that's a really good question. I mean, I did lots. I read lots of actual books, and the books like "There's No Planet B" is a good one. In fact, in "No Planet B," Tim Berners-Smith, he says you can read this book in any order you like. So it's got sort of this is like my books. So there's a lot of that in there. I read a lot of George Monbiot, and I spend a lot of time on YouTube. A lot of time on YouTube. And but also I try to get out there and meet people and do stuff and try things out. So a lot of the things in the book are things I've actually done. There's a page in there about how to make an easy sheet mulch bed. I've made so many sheet mulch beds I can do them in my sleep.
Description, actually, by the way, of a sheet mulch. Like, I want to share that particular page, give that to everyone.
Yeah.
it makes everyone want to do it, I think. Just the, just that description of how to do it. So thank you for that.
That's good. Next book, herb spirals and other permaculture cliches. But yeah, but also because I travel around primary schools anyway, I've been to over 3,000 primary schools in the last 29 years. And so I'm always researching my next book when I'm visiting school. So I'm talking about the funny life of football, and then I say, oh, by the way, at the moment I'm writing, Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet. And of course, what everybody says, and is probably true, is that children don't have very much agency. So they hear us talking about all these problems, and then they say, what are we doing about it? And of course, most people go, we recycle. Look, let's put some things in the recycling bin and then carry on as normal and book a holiday to the Caribbean. And so I thought, what are children worrying about? Because they do talk about that there is a sort of mental health crisis going on with kids worrying about these things. So I asked them, I said, what are you worried about? Obviously, after a couple of times of saying that, I then realized it was better to say, what about the planet are you worrying about? Because otherwise you get all sorts of stuff. Eventually I've got a list here. I'll read you the list. So there's things which children are worried about. Now, some of these things you'll notice that they were thought of by sort of 10, 11-year-olds, and then others of them by younger children. See if you can spot them. So basically, children are worried about pollution, obviously, climate change, temperature rising and stuff like that, plastic in the sea, sharks taking over the world, toxic waste being poured into lakes, fish with wheels. We're terrified of fish with, that's a 4-year-old. Loss of biodiversity, robot hoovers being in charge, deforestation, trees being chopped down, fancy word, ducks with swords, that's presumably chopping down trees. I hate trees, quack, quack, quack. People also worried about war, hurricanes, dying, and really bad smells taking over the planet because our next door neighbour's got something disgusting in their house, and if that spread around the world, we're a little bit of trouble. So yeah, those are all the things. So what I did was, first of all, I decided to take off the things that aren't going to happen, right? Ducks with swords, don't worry about it. Sharks are not going to take over the world. I love sharks, and they have various disadvantages which would prevent them from being in charge, like not being able to walk and not being able to breathe out of the water. If sharks learn to roller skate, we might be in trouble. Yeah, and then I took off the things we can't change. So lots of people worry about dying. Well, that's going to happen. So there's no point worrying about that. Although with the amount of miles I'm running these days, I do appear to be trying to be immortal. I think I'm in a midlife ultra running crisis. And then of course you've got things like war. Lots of kids are worried about war at the moment. For the last few years since Ukraine being invaded, and now there's a lot going on in the Middle East. But we can't do anything about that. So what we're left with is climate crisis, biodiversity, deforestation, plastic, all the rest of it. And of course, the great thing is, as I'm sure we all know, because I know I'm preaching to the converted here, is that we have all the solutions for all those things. And we're not sitting around thinking, oh no, but what do we need to do? We know what we need to do. Was it Bill Mollison who said that the problems are incredibly complicated, but the solutions are embarrassingly simple, or something like that?
Something like that.
Something like that. We have all the solutions. I saw a great thing on X the other day. Elon Musk put up a thing saying he's going to give a 10 million to have a competition for carbon capture machines, and then somebody put 10 million pounds for inventing trees. So yeah, and of course, so not only do we have the technology, we don't need to invent anything, and we have all the money, and we have all the resources. What we're short on is time, and for some reason, most people just aren't doing the stuff. So part of my mission, in hindsight, is that by living off grid, by doing what I've done, so I live in a tiny house now. My house is 7 meters long by 2.5 meters wide. It's great. I absolutely love it when it works. And I thought if I do things in an extreme way, in a mad lunatic extreme way, then maybe more medium people will be inspired to do things in a medium way. And so I went vegan. I didn't want to, but I did it anyway. I stopped flying. I went off grid, and I've tried to stop buying stuff, which is tricky. But yeah, and then the hope is, of course, that some people will go, oh, okay, well, maybe we can do a bit of that.
And you wrote
Yeah.
you had an article written about you recently in The Guardian, which Stacey's just dropped into the chat. Thanks, Stacey. What was the reaction to that? Because that was about your tiny house experience.
Excuse me. Appear to be getting hay fever now. That's helpful. Yeah. The Guardian article, I wrote it myself. It's great. They said, this is what happens with journalism now. It used to be, I'm sounding so old now. It used to be that they would phone you up, they would interview, and then they would write the article. Now they just say, "Can you write an article for us?" Yeah, right. So I wrote that, and it was in it was in like the Saturday magazine online. Obviously, it's just online, but in terms of old-fashioned print, it was Angela Rayner was before me. It was Angela Rayner, and then me, and so it was quite a big deal. And they wanted me to write like the warts and all of buying a tiny house. I love living in a tiny house. It works really well. It even works with neurodivergent people. It works with the kids. And there are complications, obviously, but it's great. So they wanted like, oh, tell us all about the arguments and the not having enough space, and and I said, I can't do that because it's not true. It's just not true. It's fine. It helps, of course, that there's 3 acres of space, so as long as it's not a blizzard happening, if anybody needs to go for a walk, then they can, and we spend most of the time outside, which is wonderful. But the problems are based on the people that sold us the house, and I can ruin dinner parties with these stories. But essentially, we decided that rather than build one ourselves, we thought, we thought we'll borrow some money. We'll just get a luxury. We'll just have it all done for us. Let's do that, and then we can concentrate on doing more stuff with the field and the farming. And so we spent a lot of money on having a tiny house delivered, and when it turned up, it didn't work basically. And the building itself is beautiful. It's triple glazed. It's the insulation is like that thick. It works very well as a building. It was made in Latvia, which was a surprise to us because the company was based in Cheshire, and they said they were a British manufacturing company. Their office is in Cheshire. But so this this house came from Latvia. My computer's doing a weird fan thing at the moment. Can you hear that?
No, I can hear you fine. It's all right.
Okay, that's good. So it turned up late, and none of the electrics worked. So basically, they just chucked in lots of appliances without any knowledge of how it works. And I kicked myself because I remember that we had a Zoom meeting talking about the spec with the company, and they're a young couple. They seem really nice. They probably are really nice, just incompetent. And they said, so yeah, there's an electric cooker, an electric hob, and the fridge and the washing machine. And by this point, I'd spent a year in a caravan with one solar panel and an inverter that size. And I was like, I don't think that's going to work. It's a lot of watts to put through a system. Is that? And they said, this is all the latest technology, and it's costing a fortune. And I just thought, okay, well, they probably know what they're doing. And they didn't know what they were doing, Morag. They had no idea. And so, of course, every time you switched anything on, everything blew. It turns out eventually that the inverter, which was on the outside of the house, wasn't an outside inverter. It was an indoor inverter. So every time it got damp, it shorted. Various other problems. And we looked at suing them for mis-selling, but they were on the verge of bankruptcy. So if we'd sued them and we'd won, we wouldn't have got anything. So eventually, I was sort of brokered a deal with them and said, look, okay, we don't want you to go bust. Let's try and make the best out of this. And so they paid to have a whole new electrical system put on top by a British-based company. I'm sure the people in Latvia are lovely. Got nothing against Latvians, but I need a company that I can phone up and they'll come and fix it if it breaks. And we switched the electric stove out for gas because, of course, gas is the dirty secret of off-grid living. Although I am looking at a biogas digester, which apparently I don't know if anybody's got one of those, but they look like these sort of weird space monsters that live in your garden, and you feed them rotten vegetables, and they give you gas. Which so I'm looking at that.
And do you have a compost?
Yeah, compost loo. Yeah. Although again, I've just replaced it with a simpler one that works better. It was one of these complicated things where you sit on it. There's a button under the seat which then opens the trap, and there's a shiwi diverter as well. And the problem with that is because it's going down underneath the house. You've then, unless you then build in some sort of building under the thing to keep everything contained, then it's not contained. So you've basically then got a bucket of poo under your house, is what you've got. And because it's further away, the sword and there's issues, right? So we dealt with that for a while, and then I realised that. So my first compost loo I built when I had a house in lockdown. My reaction to lockdown was to build a compost toilet. And I built it in the greenhouse because I've been thinking for years, yeah, we'll have to build like a shed or something. And I didn't have enough. I didn't really know what I was doing with tools and stuff. And I got this wonderful book called Humour, and he gives you the design for basically it's a box with a lid on it, and there's a bucket, and you use sawdust. And so I did that, and that worked an absolute treat. And so recently, like literally a couple of weeks ago, I decided this toilet system. Of course, the other thing is because there's a hole in the ground in the winter time, doesn't matter how insulated this house is, the toilet becomes this heat sink, and all it's freezing in there. It's absolutely freezing. And when you sit on it and it opens the hatch, I don't know if you've ever experienced a British winter, Morag, but it's not conducive to a comfortable experience. And so I took it out. It's currently behind the house. It'll go on eBay at some point. And then I have a lovely friend who's a carpenter, and he's built a really nice pedestal out of ply. And we've got the nicest toilet seat, and it's on a hinge. It's on a piano hinge, and I've gone back to the bucket system, and it's fine, much simpler. Often these things. This morning, I had to chop down a few trees because we've got a container being delivered, and which is going to be the shed for the nursery business, which we now have accidentally started. And the lorry people have said, look, we need width to spread out our legs or something. So you have to take those trees out, and they're hazel trees. So I've just coppiced them. And they will grow back twice as quickly. So I think that's okay. I don't think I've just invalidated my permaculture credentials. So I think it'll be okay. But so I did that this morning, and I've got a lovely electric chainsaw, but the battery was flat, and I couldn't find the charger. I eventually found it. I put it in a stationery drawer. I mean, my house is 7 meters long, and I couldn't find the bright green charger for the chainsaw. Right. So I thought, okay, well, I need to get this done. This is my time slot here before I come and do this. And I thought, well, hang on, I've got a bow saw in the shed here, and I've got a pruning saw, and these are hazel trees, so they're not that hard. And so I did the whole job with hand saws. Sometimes, and sometimes you think, well, oh yeah, of course,
yeah,
it's fine.
Simple way. It's like the scythe, isn't it? Some jobs are just so much easier done by hand.
Absolutely.
I wanted to jump back a bit because you were mentioning about permaculture before as a word. It's like, this sort of the cliches come, and I was really curious about the way that you included permaculture in the book, because you're saying, oh, it's a difficult, like, I don't really like the word, and I just wonder, how do you explain it to kids in a way that makes sense and sound interesting to them?
Well, I think that the word, some people have problems with the word, don't they? I don't know. It's one. I think I'm not an expert on what other people think about stuff, obviously. But my mum, right, who is genuinely interested in what I do, I think. So she paid for my permaculture design certificate. Again, during coronavirus, I thought I'll do an online course, and I'd always thought about it. And she said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I said, can I have a PDC? And she said, okay, I'll send you the money and you can do it yourself, right? And so I did. And of course, and it took me like 3 years to actually finish this online course. And every time I saw her, she would say, how's that course that I got you for your birthday? And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then she'd say, what is it again? And I say, it's permaculture, mum. And she said, yeah, but what is that? And I said, well, it's, I've come at it from a growing food perspective, but it's more than that. It's a philosophy, and it's about sustainably growing stuff and maintaining systems without depleting the world's resources. And she would go, oh, okay. And then 6 weeks later, so what is permaculture? And I've now started saying to her, well, it's applied common sense, really, isn't it? I don't know. I never used to have any common sense, but now it is that sort of thing. Like, why am I spending an hour trying to charge a chainsaw when I could use a handsaw? That to me is permaculture. I've also found that in other areas of life it applies. I love this idea of chunking, of doing a whole job before moving on to the next job. Now, for me, that is next level life skills, right? Because for years, I would have 7 projects on the go, all of them half finished. So then the concept, well, hang on, why don't you start something, finish it, and then move on to something absolutely mind blowing? So I love that. Also, I did Friedhof Capra's book and course on systems thinking a
Oh,
few
great.
years ago. And I found out that I basically am I'm a sort of a natural systems thinker. And also I think it comes from my stand-up comedy and then creating worlds in writing stories as well. Is I've got all these trains of thought going along, and I've set one up here, and I know it's gonna connect here with a brilliant callback in about 20 minutes, and I can keep track of all of that. Whereas some people just see what's in front of them, and they're also really important because they're really good at getting stuff done. But I discovered through Capra that you can apply this stuff to all the different scientific disciplines, and you can apply it to education, and you can apply it to management theory. And so I'm beginning to learn it's the same with permaculture. That's how clever and deep it is. So I haven't actually answered your question. So with children, I think rather than trying to say this is what permaculture is, I just try to say we're doing this, isn't this cool? And that seems to work better. But also, of course, the 3 ethics. If you explain those to people, then they sort of go, oh, okay, right, that works.
Yeah.
So yes, but I think I mean, I can't remember what I wrote in the book, because I haven't memorized the entire book. But in terms of what permaculture is, but I think then I go on to say,
There's something
let's
about
make a sheep milk bed.
yeah.
It's like children don't need things explained; they don't need to know.
Mm.
But I do wonder with permaculture whether it's I worry that it's not catching on because it should, and it should be. Everybody should know, and everybody should be doing. Maybe it's better in Australia because I know that's where it came from. I saw an interview with Bill Mollison a little while ago of him saying why you can't do it in universities. So, because as I understand it, he copyrighted it or registered it so that nobody could steal it, but everybody's allowed to do it unless you're university. So I suppose because if people could do a degree in it, then the academic system would ruin it, and I get that. But when I first heard about permaculture, I spent ages trying to find why can't I do an open university? Where's the course in this? I couldn't work out how it works, and I was like, oh, so you can't do like an academic course in this.
There are
We need more.
courses now, thankfully, that are offered, so like through Oregon State University or Cornell University, and I'm actually trying to gather a list of all the different places where you can do it through university, which is really,
Okay,
really,
yeah,
but not a whole degree in it, which would be quite phenomenal, I think. And
yeah.
it would be so great if every undergraduate student got a taste of permaculture and then lay it on all their other things. So they're doing economics. They first get this, and then so their economic
Yes.
thinking comes through a lens of that. Or if they're doing engineering, like, whatever it is that you're doing, you get the systems perspective first. That would make a whole lot of sense to me. I also work a lot closely with Fritjof, and it was actually he who inspired me to do permaculture. So permaculture, I use applied systems thinking, and that's kind of how I found my way into permaculture. I'm also just realizing that we've been chatting away and we haven't actually let anyone have a chance to say anything to us. So I wonder whether there's anyone who wants
to... You mean there are other people in the room?
Yes, there are indeed. And I would love to invite anyone who'd like to drop in a question in the chat, or, feel free to also, do this little pop your hand up thing, and then you'll be bumped up to the front of the I can see you and bring you into the conversation as well. So feel free to do that. Oh, actually, yes, thank you, Stacey. Just dropped in that we have something called the Mind Food film series going on. And so last week we showed Animate Earth, which was about the Gaia theory. This coming week, we've got one from Nora Bateson, which is about systems thinking. And then the next week, it's Fritjof's film. So keep an eye out for those, just to follow the thread of what we've been talking about here too. There was a question, a very practical question, James, earlier about how do people get your book, and is it possible they can get their book sent overseas?
Because it's Bloomsbury, you can, if you're in Australia, then it stocks there in the usual way. They don't have to translate it, which is quite handy. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that should be fine. I think in the Indian subcontinent you can buy them very easily as well. And that's as much as I know, to be honest. I don't know about the States. The States can be tricky with things, can't they? But if you're in the UK, if you get your book through my website, then I'll sign it for you. That's jamescampbellauthor.com. But I think you can get them all around. I'm sure Amazon will sort it out. I try and avoid Amazon, but
just go to your local bookstore and say, I would like this book in my, why don't you get this book and stick it in your front window and encourage everyone to get this book, and just order it through there. That's what I always do with I've got a local bookstore up in town, in Mullaney, my town here, and I go in with my little list and they organize everything for me. It's so much better than supporting those big multinational.
Definitely. I do the same with a bookshop in Colchester, and I only go into Colchester about once a month. But when I go, and then I go into the Red Lion bookshop, it's called, and I say, I ordered the book, I think, I can't remember what it is, and they go, you've ordered 9, and here they are, you now owe us £112. And I go, oh, I have no memory of all.
Yeah,
it's like there's a delayed gratification there, isn't there? Amazon, you buy it and then it turns up before you've even pressed the click button. But by doing it for a bookshop, and then the next time you're in town, by that point you've completely forgotten what you've ordered, and I prefer that.
There's a few comments in there too saying give copies to your local school, or get your local school library to buy them. Ask at your local libraries too and get them to buy a series as well. That would be fabulous. And Jerry, I saw your hand up. Did you want to open your mic? And
yeah, sorry, I put it down again, Morag. Hi, James. Great to see you and hear you. It's really fun to listen. No, I was looking to find, because of bloody Brexit, doesn't ship to Ireland anymore, the UK. So yeah, I know. But I just found it in a local bookshop. Huh?
We don't ship to Ireland anymore.
No, okay. No. Well, your website doesn't ship to Ireland.
Yeah, well, it's equity. Well, okay. Well, we'll just send me an email.
Okay, it's okay. No, it's okay. I found it in an Irish bookshop.
Okay. Well, that's all right then. That's good. Well, we can ship to Belfast, and then you can smuggle them over the border.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, so anyway, if you did want to contact James and find his book and more references, the links are there in the chat as well. Just want to, one of the big parts of your book, and, this is something that's really important for everyone, is this notion of agency. And you mentioned it a bit before. So, the big book is about we can save the planet. And so, at the end, you really encourage people to step up and do what it is that matters to you. I wonder whether you got any examples of things that you've seen people doing as a result of reading this book, or ideas that you like to suggest that people could do, things that you've dropped in the book for the kids that could be transferable to us grown-ups as well.
Well, there's what I've tried to do for each area of stuff like energy, building, water. There are four types of things that people can do. There's things you can do as an individual, which nobody can stop you doing. Things you can do as a family, things you can do as a community, which for most children is their school, but it might be your village or your tower block or your street, whatever. And then there's things that the government can do. And obviously, children don't get to vote, unfortunately, but they can write really rude letters to their local member of parliament. But I think the school stuff is really important. I've been, as I go around schools, I've been encouraging children to start eco clubs. Most schools don't have one. And so what I've been doing, which seems to work well, we'll see how it works in the long term, but I say, explain to them what an eco club is, and then people go, oh yeah. So I say, put your hand up if you would like to be in something like that. And maybe 30% will put their hands up. Some people just really don't care. And then I say, now keep your hand up if you'd like to organise it, if you'd like to be in charge, you'd like to be responsible for making it happen. And most of them will then keep their hands up. So then I say, now look, keep your hands up and look around and see who else has got their hands up. These are your people you need to connect with. And I'll always say, and also you'll notice that none of the grown-ups here have got their hand up. And then maybe one will sheepishly put their hand, but bless them, they've got a lot of work to do. That's okay. So I said, so this needs to be something that doesn't require any adults. So maybe it needs to be at lunchtime under that tree on a Thursday, and you get together and you talk about stuff and see what happens. And then I'm thinking about starting an online Zoomy eco parliament for kids, which I think we're good. So as I've been going around theatres, I've been asking people about that, and people are saying yes, because my theatre show, which is also called Don't Panic, We Can Save the Planet, is attracting all the kids that would start an eco club. But I was in a theatre in Southend yesterday, in Essex, and there was a lady there. So I've been to her daughter's school, and since then she's been obsessed with trying to save the planet, and she's been getting up every morning and doing a litter pick on her own in the street, which is amazing. I think that's amazing because that's not something that I would instinctively do. My local transition town group, they do litter picks, and I never get involved because it's boring. So the idea of like, what I just get up, I need a camera involved. So I'll write a book about it. But it reminds me that no, I also have to get out and pick the litter up, don't I? Of course I do. So if there's a child doing that, that's really inspiring to me. I think also starting eco clubs is good, writing letters is good. But just the little, the little local stuff that you can do, really hyper local stuff. So you can worry about tigers and orangutans and polar bears, but pick that brick up and see who's living underneath it. Go into the garden and make a wildlife sanctuary of your garden. Connecting with nature, I think, is really important. There's been lots of interviews I've done for newspapers and magazines and radio, and many interviewers will ask me, they'll say, if there's one thing, James, that people can do, what is that? Because we like a sound bite, don't we? But there's no one thing. There might be one thing. And first of all, I started saying, well, maybe each person has a one thing that they should definitely do, and maybe that's different for different people. I went vegan because all the climate scientists and eco-WORRIERs I interviewed, when I said, what's the one thing that people can do? They said, well, you've got to go vegan, otherwise nobody will take you seriously. And that may not be true. I don't know. But I thought, well, I'll do it for a month, see how it goes. And it turns out it's really easy. And I also watched all the films about animal farming. And then I thought, no, I'm since thinking I might get some ducks, right? I don't know. So I think it's not black and white for me, but that's probably one thing, be more plant-based. And then I thought about it some more, and I think if we can find a way to encourage children to do one thing, that one thing should be cultivate an attitude whereby you don't always go with the crowd, because the crowd is usually lost. And so it's so hard as a herd-based human life form to look at everybody else doing something and go, no, not going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go this way because everybody else is going that way. We just like to join in with what everybody else is doing, and to change from that, whatever that mindset is, and go, no, they're all going in the wrong direction, is hard. So how do we teach our children to have the confidence in themselves to go the opposite way? I think that's possibly one of the little building blocks that we need to solve the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm talking with people like Nora Bates and another fabulous systems thinker, and she said, you know, that the change that needs to happen is a change of perception.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like actually what's going on in how we think about ourselves in relationship with each other, with nature. It's like that shift that happens here, and that's kind of what you're saying, to really think about it yourself and to find how it is that you feel like you can step up and do these things. And, you know, having the support like a group, like a hub, like your eco hub, I think that's such a brilliant idea. And, you know, every single one of the people here in this room or listening to this later could also do with their own eco hub, eco club group, you know, kitchen table conversations, whatever it might be. So a group of people that you can have some really good yarns about and work out what it is that you can actually do today, tomorrow, the next day, and feel like you have, you know, the support of a friendly group of people to help make it happen. Thank you so much for joining us today, James. There's someone, Jerry, you got your hand up. Was that from before or is that again?
That's again.
Okay,
I just had a quick question. I was wondering if James had any experience of or requests for doing any of his stuff in secondary schools with older kids.
I visit secondary schools as well, talking about my books. Usually sort of year 7, year 8, they call them here. So that, you know, the first 2 years. After that, no, I don't think they want to talk to me. But yeah, but I think with this, I think there is more scope for that, definitely. So yes, I visit secondary schools when they ask me to. I would say probably 95% of the school visits I do are primary. But when secondaries ask, then absolutely. And I think with secondary schools, there's even more scope for action, I think, as well, in terms of teenagers organising things. I do online or have done online writing classes for teenagers, and I'm always amazed at a teenager's ability to obsess and hyper focus over things and get stuff done. So yes, they're probably a big part of the future as well.
And you do actually have a book too about how to write, don't you? Isn't that?
I do, yeah. I haven't got one at this end of the house. It's called Write Your Own Funny Stories. So yes, I think more people should write. We get obsessed with making sure that children are reading, but I think creative writing is very, very important. I think yeah, I think with all of this, again, when I'm writing stories, and sometimes I think to myself, why am I writing this story? It's just a story. Should I not be writing something useful or important? And then sometimes I think, well, all stories are important because you learn how to empathize by reading books. You learn how to think about other people and see things from other people's point of view. And we need more of that. We definitely need more of that. We need to see things from the point of view of the people whose resources we're stealing. And we need to see things from the point of view of people who haven't been born yet, which is quite a stretch of empathy. And reading novels and finding out about people who don't exist, I think stretches those empathy muscles. So yeah, it's but then so reading is important, but then to create all that as well is an even bigger step. And it took me years to work out that maybe my brain is different from your brain. Maybe I see things different from how you do. But for me, the whole world is made up of stories and connections, and punchlines, and that's how I see it. And some people don't have that ability. They have other abilities that I don't have. And it's occurred to me, I think I read it somewhere. It might have been Bishop, I'm not sure, but we don't just need engineers and scientists to create the solutions for our poly crisis. I'm going to use that word again because I love it. we need artists. We need artists who can imagine the future that the engineers are going to build. And that's not to denigrate the creativity of engineers, of course, but you can't build something unless you can imagine it first. So, so it's all
what
very
does Richard
important.
say, that life is inherently creative? Like, that's one of his 4 pillars of what is life. You know, that life is creative, and that's how life unfolded in the first instance. And yes, in our kind of Western ways of seeing the world, that's kind of been sidelined for the sort of the serious stuff, whereas actually that is one of the most important things that underpins how life happens and how change happens. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us of that here. Thank you so much, James. It's been an absolute delight to have you here, and I think all of us have very sore jaws from smiling so much. I certainly do. And yeah, I will be sharing out the links in a reminder email to all of you who are here about where to get the book and what's coming up next in terms of some of these films that we're showing that link back to what we've talked about here. And yeah, thank you so much, James. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just looking at the chat here, and somebody's suggesting maybe a story about Polly and the crisis she can't unsee. I'll work on that. Thanks. I'll give you a cut. It's been an absolute privilege to be a part of this. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sure we will do something similar again soon.
Yeah, wonderful. Take care, James. See you later. Bye, everyone.